I am so excited and so afraid to film this video because it is my top 11 books of 2015, and there is nothing more scary to me than having to talk to you about a book and not be able to explain it adequately, especially if it is one of my favourites. I have picked these as completely subjective, my favourites, ones that I will always remember, will always keep, and things that have changed the way I read in 2015. The word form may not be adequate, but we will try to amp down the pressure. I'm going to promise myself that if I do feel like how I've explained these books in this video is inadequate, which it probably will be, I will make whole videos discussing the topics that they're on. And some of them I read at the very beginning of 2015 and have been putting off even mentioning them on this channel because I wanted to do them a proper service. But it is the end of 2015, and a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. And on that note, my first book is Feral by George Monbiot. Can we get a load of this cover? I love photographic covers when they're done properly, and I think this one is stunning and it had such an impact on me in the shop. I bought it just when it came out because I was just like, this is amazing. The subtitle for this book is Searching for the Enchantment on the Frontiers of Rewilding. They changed the subtitle for the paperback, and I think this one is much more exciting and kind of represents a lot more of what it's about. George Monbiot is an expert in his field and also writes for The Guardian. He writes some great nature articles for The Guardian. In brief, can I do it in brief? In brief, this is a enchanting and very beautifully written study of the way we as British people, I suppose, approach the idea of the wild, what we think the wild really is, what it means to us. Why, as a culture that came out of a place of fairy tales and mythology, we're very scared of woods, of wild animals, of wolves, and the way that the economy and the way that climate change is affecting how we respond to the landscape and how we think about it. So, for example, it really, for the first time, I actually started to understand this thing called shifting baseline syndrome, which is a kind of collective attitude of everybody to remember 2 generations ago and what their landscape was like, and then adapt that in our minds as natural. So, for instance, we look at farmlands and we look at, say what the Yorkshire Dales looks like now and think, oh yeah, that's really natural, that's how it should be. When actually, if you look at it properly, outside of the rose-tinted spectacles idea of what our great-grandfathers considered natural, which they didn't, by the way, but what we think they considered natural, is actually the result of a farming economy that is no longer around and won't be possible as much in the future. I love it because it's so intelligent, it's so relatable, and it's so rooted kind of in our study of fairy tales and how we exist as a culture, but also in science and stuff that I would never be able to know about otherwise. Also, I think it'd be quite interesting for vegans to look at it and see, how we've come to be where we are and where we get our food from, but also case studies. So there's a lot of stuff about Scotland in here and how there are, three quarters of the land in Scotland is owned by about 5 families or something insane, and the idea of the estate and collecting nature and getting deer onto your estate and then shooting them and kind of not letting certain kinds of wildlife grow because they're unnatural or they're not pretty, and then other parts of it thrive to the point of, am I sounding boring? It's not boring, I promise. But what I like about this, it isn't a kind of rambling shepherd's life wandering through the hills being like, it used to be amazing and now we really screwed up. It's kind of like, well, it's always been a little bit screwed up, but let's look to the future rather than trying to mimic the past and reverse what's already happened. I've talked about that enough. I don't know if I made it sound interesting enough, but I would just like to highlight how bloody beautiful this is. And it also mentions one of my favourite places in the world, Machynlleth, which is where the Centre for Alternative Technology is. I made a video about that once. I really like it. I'm going to read it again, and then I'm going to make a whole video on it. And if you're bored, I don't care. It's so refreshing to just read something that I'm like, oh, this is science and it's brilliantly written. Thank you. I've got notes in the margins the whole way through this book. I didn't stop making notes. This is Jerusalem by Jez Butterworth, and this is a play. It's a play about Wiltshire. It's a play about drugs. It's a play about, again, fairy tales and where they come from and how we adapt to them now, whether we are disconnected from this ancestry. So it's about this, basically the plot revolves around this guy who is this old drug-using, crazy man who lives in this overgrown caravan, and it's set in the summer when there's like a summer solstice festival going on with all the villagers, Morris dancing and being sarcastic and very Wiltshire. If you're not from the UK and you haven't heard a Wiltshire accent, well, you haven't lived. Got a lot of swearing in it, and it's really funny, and it's got a lot of, like, basically this guy, he lives in the caravan, he's having this struggle between the council trying to move him on, but at the same time him being, like, both just despised by the older, more middle-class members of the town, then kind of loved by all of these ragtag teenagers who don't have anywhere else to go. He's the quintessential outcast that he says the English forests are for. That's his birthright. The mythology and the history of the English woods is that they're there for the outcasts, and they're there for the people that don't fit in. And the fact that the council is trying to move him on is a kind of insult to what British forests even stand for. It's really fast to read. I love reading plays because I'd say with a film, you don't have to imagine that much because it's there. With a descriptive normal novel, it's kind of like half and half. It's like half of it's there and then you get to create the rest. With plays, you get to create so much of it, but it's so fast paced and it's so like deliciously good that I just think this is genuinely one of the best plays I've ever seen and the best plays I've ever read. And it's also super funny, so. To save time, the next one is The Age of Earthquakes. I reviewed this quite recently. Lots of you said you bought it and loved it. It's not going to take you any time to read because it's lots of pictures and concepts and it'll bend your mind and you'll never believe anything again. Links below if you'd like to see more review of that. We've got It's Not Me, It's You by Mhairi McFarlane. I'm making my way through all of Mhairi McFarlane's books. You'll see soon that I've got some new ones to go. I'll have some other reviews for books coming up, but this is the first one I read. And I read this just because everybody I met said they liked it, and I hadn't read any women's fiction in a really long time, and that annoyed me because I remember that being a genre that was actually kind of awesome if done right, a bit like YA. Reading this book gave me a jump start to read more books like it because I remembered how much I just enjoy them, and isn't that what we're all here for? And I feel like with films, I love rom-coms and I love stuff like that, especially like intelligent, like indie rom-coms, and like this, if this was a film, it'd be an intelligent indie rom-com, and it's just so funny, and it like is within its genre of like a quest for stuff, but it's also just like a woman working in PR in London. That's probably why I like it as well, isn't it? The way Mhairi McFarlane writes is very self-conscious. She knows like what tropes she's using and she does them really well, while at the same time making it really, really easy to read. So here's a little extract just to persuade you. Art didn't prepare you for the smaller moments between the big moments, Delilah thought. Life had no editing suite to shape the narrative into something that flowed. If the arrival of Paul's text, Paul is her ex, at the very beginning, bad stuff happens with Paul. Paul is her boyfriend. If the arrival of Paul's text had happened on screen, after the close-up of Delilah's horrified face, there'd have been a jump cut to her bowling away down the street, stumbling on her heels, brackets, rom-com, slinging plates around their kitchen, brackets, soap opera, angrily filling in battered clasp-locked suitcase, brackets, music video, or staring out across the blustery Tyne, brackets, art house. Instead, what happened next undercut the momentous awfulness with boring practicality. The main character is also a comic book illustrator, so she is illustrating a comic alongside her life. So every chapter you get an extract from the comic she is writing, which just 100% won me over and made me think that this book should, you know, this has such wide appeal, like so many different kinds of people would like it. And you'll be hearing more from me talking about Mhairi McFarlane very soon. So yeah, that one goes in there, one, because I just bloody enjoyed it, and also because it like kind of kick-started me back into a genre I hadn't been reading for a long time. The next one is All This Has Something to Do With Me. I read this very early in the year, and later in the year I was lucky enough